The dark citadel of Gordium lay before Abaya and Phanuel as they purged the city. They needed the city to be cleansed to ensure that there were no threats remaining to their flanks. Most of the forces within the city withdrew to the more defensible tower, which was surrounded by thick, high walls and a sturdy gate. Abaya could see dark shapes moving atop the parapets. Meanwhile, the fighting in the city was fierce and terrible. Neither the Temerine nor the Ashkenazi were accustomed to warfare of this kind. They were not the sort of peoples to exterminate an entire city. Warfare usually involved killing or capturing soldiers, ideally capturing high-value targets for ransom. Sometimes a city or town would be sacked and looted, but if the goal of the war was to seize and hold territory, commanders would make an effort to show restraint to the citizenry. But the mark of evil was upon every man of Gordium. The people of Gordium now had an unnatural and uncanny quality about them that made them both alluring and repulsive. Their flesh lost its natural coloring, becoming either starkly pale or tinged with the color of wine. Many had filed their teeth to points, and their eyes had become inky pools of blackness, their irises becoming indistinguishable from their pupils. The purging began with some hesitancy. The men were ready to kill monsters and raiders, but putting an entire city to the torch was another matter. But then the door-to-door fighting began, and the viciousness and cunning of the corrupted ones became clear. One minute a woman was pleading for her life. The next, her teeth were at the throat of the soldier who hesitated to kill her. Ambushes like this were sprung all over the city with the cruel poisoned arrows and daggers of Gordium. The citizenry fought like cornered beasts, and the attackers quickly lost all sympathy for these foes and set upon them methodically and brutally. Some slaves were freed, but many were too twisted or tortured to be saved. The mangled forms of these pitiable creatures were often more shocking than the actual fighting. Many of the slaves had been brutally scarred, blinded, castrated, disfigured, or surgically altered in bizarre ways. One man had his jaw removed, and his desiccated tongue flopped this way and that, with only a dry, cracking sound issuing from his vocal cords. These unfortunates were given the Emperor's mercy. As the city of Gordium was cleansed, more troops began to gather beneath the tower, making sure to stay out range of the harrying, deadly arrows of the heretics. Abaya took a position and aimed his rifle to the forces above the gate. He was in no rush. He simply waited until a head popped up. Then the young man took his shot. He wasn't always certain if his shot found the mark, but fewer and fewer heads were popping up by the time he emptied his magazine. Abaya reloaded as Captain Phanuel addressed him.
Good. Keep their heads down. But keep your rate of fire as slow as you can. I want you to conserve ammunition. It's possible we could assault the walls, but I believe we would take unnecessary casualties.
Especially with those black arrows. Abaya offered a weak grin. The flesh is weak, after all.
Yes, the flesh is weak. And so is that gate. Keep them occupied. I will be quick.
With that, the mighty space marine ran towards the enemy gate at a full sprint. Once again, Abaya could not help but marvel at seeing the Space Marine move so quickly. Even though he had seen it before, his mind would not allow him to conceive of something so large moving at such speeds. A few of the heretics heard the stomp of ceramite-clad boots and rose to fire their hellish darts, and Abaya was there to fire at each one. The arrows clanged harmlessly off of Fanuel's pauldrons. For a moment, Abaya thought the golem would simply plow straight through the gate. At this point, such an act would not have surprised him. But instead, the Iron Hands captain did something that was possibly even more shocking. He sprang forward, planted both his feet, and leapt high into the air. The enemy battlements were at least 9 or 10 meters high. But this massive man of metal simply leapt to the top. There was a loud cry that rose from the defenders inside. Abaya could hear the echoes of bolter fire and the roar of Fanuel's chainsword. There were several more shots, and the piercing clang of a bolter round hitting metal. The gate shuddered. Then there was another, and the great drawbridge quivered before plunging down, clattering to the earth. Without waiting for a single moment, Al-Rashid cried out, and his assembled horsemen charged into the breach. Beyond the walls, inside, Abaya could see an assembled horde within, all bearing cursed armor and weapons, bearing the marks of heresy. That sick feeling of dread washed over Abaya again. He and the musketeers fired a quick volley into the enemy before the Temerine engaged the cultists, hacking and slashing at their twisted foes. Abaya could see Fanuel fighting viciously on the battlements, his armor bearing the scars of the enemy weapons. But he was far from broken. Instead, he was driving the enemies from the wall. And as the forces loyal to the Emperor poured into the courtyard, Abaya knew that the battle for the Citadel of Gordium, the final battle, had truly begun. No man do they call me, my mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Thank you all for listening to the latest episode of Heart of Iron. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a like and a comment so that one day you too can purge the land of heretics. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so in order to hear more stories about horrid miscreants receiving the Emperor's justice. If you would like to support me, there are links below to my PayPal, my Patreon, and my Teespring. And if you have absolutely no idea what's going on, then you can click on the Heart of Iron playlist, which should be appearing on screen right now. Thank you very much once again for listening. No Man out.